The oldest mention of Yahweh was attributed to the Moabite stone, also known as the Mesha stele. This monumental stone was erected by King Mesha of Moab around 840 BCE to commemorate his triumph over Israel. Inscribed on the stele, Mesha recounts his victory and claims to have taken the sacred objects dedicated to Yahweh, the deity revered by the Israelites, and offered them to Chemosh, the chief god of Moab. These objects were likely taken from the temple of Yahweh in Samaria, the capital of Israel at that time. Discovered in 1868 in present-day Jordan and published in 1870, the Moabite stone created significant excitement as the first non-biblical inscription mentioning Yahweh. The stele recounted a similar event to the biblical narrative in 2 Kings 3, where Mesha, the Moabite king, rebels against Israel. However, a crucial difference emerged. The stele claimed a victory for Moab, while the Bible maintained that Israel was the triumphant party. The interpretation of the Yahweh reference further reinforced the notion that Yahweh was exclusively the God of the Israelites. Mesha boasted of seizing the vessels associated with the Israelite god as tribute to his own god, Chemosh. This view suggested that Yahweh was distinctively worshipped by the Israelites alone. In 1844, the archaeologist Carl Richard Lepsius excavated the ruins of the ancient city of Soleb in Nubia, meticulously documenting the site. However, no excavation took place during his investigation. In 1907, James Henry Breasted visited the site and captured photographs, but did not engage in any excavation either. It was not until 1957 that a team led by archaeologist Michela Schiff-Giorgini conducted extensive excavations at Soleb. During their work, they discovered a reference to a group referred to as the Shasu of Yahweh at the base of one of the temple's columns in the hypostyle hall. This temple had been constructed by Amenhotep III, who reigned from 1386 to 1353 BCE. The mention of Yahweh in association with the Shasu indicated that this god had been worshipped by another people long before the events described in biblical narratives were believed to have occurred. The Shasu, described by the Egyptians as Semitic nomads, often regarded as outlaws or bandits, were listed among Egypt's adversaries on the temple column at Soleb. Additionally, they were mentioned in an inscription from the reign of Ramesses II as enemies of the pharaoh during the Battle of Kadesh. Given the Shasu's nomadic nature, attempts have been made to link them with the Hebrews or the Habiru, a group of dissidents in the Levant. However, these claims have been refuted. The Shasu were not Hebrew, and the Habiru appeared to be Canaanites who resisted conforming to local customs rather than a distinct ethnic group. The discovery of Amenhotep III's reference to the Shasu of Yahweh pushed the origins of this god further back in history than previously believed, and also hinted that Yahweh might not have originated from Canaan. This supported the theory that Yahweh was a desert deity adopted by the Hebrews during their exodus from Egypt to Canaan. Some scholars interpreted the descriptions of Yahweh as a pillar of fire at night and a cloud during the day, as well as other fire-related imagery in the book of Exodus, as indicative of a storm or weather god. Moreover, Yahweh's ability to guide Moses to water sources, Exodus 17:6 and Numbers 20, further reinforced the notion of Yahweh as a desert god. Nonetheless, it is widely accepted in modern times that Yahweh initially emerged as a minor deity in the Canaanite pantheon, specifically in southern Canaan, and the Shasu, as nomads, likely adopted the worship of Yahweh during their time in the Levant. Recent scholarship has prompted a reinterpretation of the Moabite stone, revealing that the people of Moab also worshipped Yahweh. Consequently, Mesha's reference to taking the vessels of Yahweh to Chemosh likely meant that he considered them the rightful possessions of the Moabites, rather than the spoils of conquering Israel and their God. The word Yahweh is not just a name, but a linguistic artifact, a testament to the times and cultures that birthed it. It's a word that carries with it the echoes of ancient civilizations, their beliefs, their languages, and their understanding of the divine. The name Yahweh, as we've discovered, is deeply rooted in the ancient Semitic languages. It's a name that resonates with the linguistic patterns of the region, patterns that are echoed in the languages of the Canaanites, the Israelites, and the Arabs. The name Yahweh, in its original form, was likely pronounced differently, reflecting the phonetic nuances of these ancient tongues. The grammatical structure of Yahweh is intriguing. It's a name that seems to be intrinsically linked to the verb to be. This connection to the verb to be suggests a sense of being, of existence, that is inherent in the name Yahweh. The meaning of the name Yahweh has been interpreted as "he who makes that which has been made," or "he brings into existence whatever exists," though other interpretations have been offered by many scholars. In the late Middle Ages, Yahweh came to be changed to Jehovah by Christian monks, a name commonly in use today. However, the name Yahweh is not just about existence. It's also about passion, about commitment. The name Yahweh could be derived from the Arabic language, indicating a passion or a commitment of the deity towards his people. This interpretation aligns with the frequent references in the Bible to Yahweh as a jealous God, a God who is passionately committed to his people. The name Yahweh, therefore, is not just a name. It's a declaration of existence, a testament of commitment, a proclamation of divine passion. It's a name that encapsulates the essence of the deity it represents, a deity who is passionately committed to his people, a deity who exists, who is. From being a local deity of the Midianites, a tribe that traced its lineage back to Abraham, Yahweh transformed into the sole deity of the Israelites. This transformation is mirrored in the evolution of the name Yahweh, a name that began as a reflection of a local deity's commitment to his tribe and evolved into a declaration of the one true God's existence and commitment to his chosen people. The name of this supreme being was considered too holy to be spoken. As a result, the consonants YHWH were used to remind one to say the word Adonai, Lord, in place of the God's name. This practice of using epithets in referencing a deity was common throughout the Near East. However, the origins of Yahwism remain shrouded in mystery. Even the final edited form of Genesis 2, Kings in the Bible, presents diverse views on the matter. Some passages trace the worship of Yahweh back to the earliest days of the human race, while others trace the revelation and worship of Yahweh back to Moses. The character and power of Yahweh were codified following the Babylonian captivity of the 6th century BCE, and the Hebrew scriptures were canonized during the Second Temple period, approximately 515 BCE to 70 CE, to include the concept of a Messiah whom Yahweh would send to the Jewish people to lead and redeem them. Yahweh, as the all-powerful creator, preserver, and redeemer of the universe, was then later developed by the early Christians as their God who had sent his son Jesus as the promised Messiah, and Islam interpreted this same deity as Allah in their belief system. As the Iron Age dawned around 1200 to 930 BCE, the Israelites in Canaan sought to distinguish themselves from their neighbors. In a bid to consolidate political and military strength, they elevated Yahweh above El, the supreme deity, and claimed him as their own. Yahweh's association with the forge and with imagery of fire, smoke, and smiting made him a fitting deity of storms and war. His character transformed from a deity of transformation to one of conquest. El, often referred to as the supreme god in the Canaanite pantheon, was a deity of immense stature and reverence. His influence was widespread, and his name was synonymous with divinity itself. El was the epitome of wisdom, authority, and fatherhood, often depicted as an elderly figure with a flowing beard, seated on a throne. His realm was that of justice, kindness, and compassion, and he was often invoked for blessings of fertility and prosperity. Yahweh, on the other hand, emerged from a more obscure background. Initially a regional deity associated with the wilderness and stormy weather, Yahweh's influence grew over time, eventually permeating the entire Israelite society. His rise was not without contention, but his followers were steadfast, and Yahweh's prominence continued to grow. The relationship between Yahweh and El is a complex one, marked by both conflict and convergence. There are indications that Yahweh was initially considered a lesser deity in the pantheon that included El. However, as Yahweh's influence grew, so did his stature. The lines between the two deities began to blur, leading to a period of syncretism where characteristics and roles were shared or transferred. One of the most intriguing aspects of this relationship is the potential role reversal that occurred. As Yahweh's prominence rose, there are indications that he began to adopt some of the roles and characteristics traditionally associated with El. This is particularly evident in the depiction of Yahweh as a compassionate and just deity, roles that were traditionally associated with El. The convergence of Yahweh and El is also evident in the linguistic analysis of their names and titles. The name El is often used in the Hebrew Bible as a generic term for God, and it is also incorporated into the names of various characters and places, indicating its widespread usage and significance. Similarly, the name Yahweh also appears in various forms and combinations, further indicating a level of convergence between the two deities. However, this convergence was not without conflict. The rise of Yahweh led to a shift in the religious landscape, with a growing emphasis on monotheism. This shift was likely met with resistance from those who adhered to the traditional polytheistic beliefs, leading to a period of religious tension and conflict. Despite these conflicts, the eventual dominance of Yahweh is undeniable. Over time, Yahweh transitioned from a regional deity to the sole God of the Israelites. This transition was not just a simple replacement of one deity with another, but rather a complex process of religious evolution and transformation. This shift is evident in Israel's early poetry and narrative literature, where Yahweh is often portrayed as a militant figure. The Song of the Sea in Exodus 15:1-18, and the Song of Deborah in Judges 5 are typical examples, praising Yahweh as the divine warrior who intervenes on behalf of his followers. It's suggested that Yahweh's status as the national god was primarily established in connection with Israel's wars. During times of peace, the tribes would have depended heavily on Baal in his various local forms to ensure fertility. But when they came together to wage war against their common enemies, they would have turned to Yahweh, the divine warrior who could provide victory. The image of Yahweh as warrior is prevalent throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, which later became the Christian Old Testament. Warrior imagery is also apparent in passages in the New Testament, which drew on the earlier works. In the early days of Israel, Yahweh was perceived as a warrior storm god, a deity of power and might who was deeply connected to the natural elements. This image of Yahweh was likely influenced by the surrounding Canaanite religions, which also worshipped storm gods. The Israelites, living in a region prone to violent weather phenomena, would naturally gravitate towards a deity that embodied these powerful forces. This practice evolved into worship of deities such as El, Asherah, Baal, Utu Shamash, and Yahweh, among others. In the early days of the Israelites in Canaan, the people practiced a form of ancestor worship, venerating the god of the father, or the god of the house, in addition to paying homage to their earthly ancestors. However, The worship of Yahweh was not confined to his storm god aspect. As the Israelites interacted with neighboring cultures and their religious practices, Yahweh's image began to evolve. He was increasingly seen as a god of fertility and abundance, a protector of the people, and a dispenser of justice. This shift in perception was likely influenced by the Canaanite fertility goddess Asherah, who was popular among the Israelites. Despite the popularity of Asherah, there was a significant theological controversy surrounding her worship. The Israelites, particularly those in the southern kingdom of Judah, were increasingly moving towards monotheism, and the worship of Asherah was seen as a threat to this emerging belief system. The Israelite prophets, such as Elijah, vehemently opposed the worship of Asherah and other Canaanite deities, leading to violent conflicts and the eventual suppression of Asherah's cult. The worship of Yahweh in ancient Israel was also influenced by the political landscape of the time. The northern kingdom of Israel was more affluent and open to syncretism, incorporating elements from various religions into their worship of Yahweh. However, this practice was heavily criticized by the southern kingdom of Judah, which was moving towards an exclusive worship of Yahweh. The destruction of the northern kingdom by the Assyrians in 722 BCE marked a significant turning point in the worship of Yahweh. The refugees from the north were absorbed into the southern kingdom, bringing with them their syncretic religious practices. This influx of northern influences likely contributed to the further evolution of Yahweh's image and the development of unique Israelite religious practices. As the Israelites developed their community in Canaan, they sought to distance themselves from their neighbors and elevated Yahweh above the traditional Canaanite supreme deity El. However, they did not embrace monotheism at this time. The Israelites remained a henotheistic people through the time of the Judges and throughout the time of the Kingdom of Israel, approximately 1080 to 722 BCE. In 931 BCE, following the death of Solomon, the kingdom split in two and a new political entity, the Kingdom of Judah with its capital at Jerusalem, emerged in the south. The Kingdom of Judah, nestled in the southern part of the land of Canaan, was a place where the worship of Yahweh was deeply entrenched in the fabric of society. Here, Yahweh was not just a deity to be revered. He was the cornerstone of their identity, the divine guarantor of their destiny. The Judahites saw themselves as the chosen people of Yahweh, and this belief shaped their religious practices, their political decisions, and their cultural expressions. In Judah, Yahweh was perceived as a warrior god, a protector who would defend his people against their enemies. This image of Yahweh was likely influenced by the tumultuous times in which the Kingdom of Judah found itself. Surrounded by powerful empires and often caught in the crossfire of their conflicts, the Judahites looked to Yahweh for protection and deliverance. This belief in Yahweh's protective power was not just a spiritual conviction. It was a tangible reality that shaped their military strategies, their diplomatic relations, and their internal policies. The worship of Yahweh in Judah was not just a matter of personal faith. It was a state-sponsored activity. The kings of Judah, starting from David and Solomon, were seen as the earthly representatives of Yahweh. They were believed to be anointed by Yahweh himself to rule over his people. This divine endorsement gave them not just political authority, but also religious authority. They were the custodians of the Yahwistic faith, responsible for maintaining the purity of its practices and upholding its principles. However, the relationship between Yahweh and the kings of Judah was not always harmonious. There were times when the kings, swayed by political expediency or personal ambition, deviated from the path of Yahwistic faith. They introduced foreign gods into the religious landscape of Judah, allowed syncretistic practices to creep into the worship of Yahweh, and even persecuted the prophets who dared to speak against their actions. These deviations were seen as acts of apostasy, betrayals of Yahweh that invited divine punishment. In the midst of these religious upheavals, the prophets emerged as the conscience of Judah. They were the voice of Yahweh, calling the people back to the true worship of their God. They denounced the idolatrous practices, condemned the social injustices, and warned of the dire consequences of abandoning Yahweh. Their words were not always welcome, but they were necessary. They were the beacon that guided the people of Judah back to Yahweh whenever they strayed from him. The worship of Yahweh in Judah was not a static phenomenon. It was a dynamic process that evolved over time. It was shaped by the historical experiences of the people, the theological reflections of the prophets, and the political decisions of the kings. It was a faith that was deeply rooted in the past, yet constantly adapting to the present. It was a faith that was fiercely monotheistic, yet open to the influences of the surrounding cultures. It was a faith that was profoundly personal, yet inextricably linked to the collective identity of the people. In the end, the worship of Yahweh in Judah was not just about the reverence of a deity. It was about the pursuit of a divine vision. It was about the quest for a society where justice prevailed, where righteousness was upheld, and where the divine and the human were in harmonious relationship. It was about the dream of a kingdom where Yahweh reigned supreme, not just in the religious sphere, but in every aspect of life. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah periodically warred or allied with each other until 722 BCE, when the Assyrians destroyed Israel and deported the inhabitants. Judah was able to withstand the Assyrian military campaigns, but only by paying tribute to Assyria. The Assyrian Empire fell to an invading force of Babylonians, Medes, and others in 612 BCE, and the Babylonians claimed the region of Canaan. In 598 BCE, they invaded Judah and sacked Jerusalem, destroying the Temple of Solomon and taking the leading citizens back to Babylon. This is the time in Jewish history known as the Babylonian captivity. Babylon was conquered by Cyrus the Great of the Persians, who allowed the Jewish leaders to return to their homeland in 538 BCE. During the Second Temple period, approximately 515 BCE to 70 CE, Judaism was revised, the Torah canonized, and a new understanding of the divine established, which today is known as monotheism, the belief in a single deity. At this time, scholars have established the older works, which eventually became the Hebrew Scriptures, were revised to reflect a monotheistic belief system among the Israelites far earlier than was actually practiced. In this polytheistic milieu, Yahweh was initially one among many. His domain was the wilderness and the storms, and his followers were likely a nomadic group who sought his protection and guidance. But as we have seen, Yahweh's influence and stature grew over time, eventually leading to his dominance in the Israelite religious landscape. However, this transition was not a straightforward or linear process. It was a complex and dynamic evolution marked by cultural exchanges, theological debates, and socio-political changes. The early Israelites lived in close proximity to other cultures and civilizations, and their religious beliefs and practices were undoubtedly influenced by these interactions. The Canaanites, for instance, had a rich and complex pantheon of gods and goddesses, with El as the supreme deity. The influence of the Canaanite religion on the early Israelite beliefs is evident in various aspects, including the use of the name El as a generic term for God in the Hebrew Bible. However, despite these influences, the Israelites maintained a distinct identity and belief system. They recognized Yahweh as their God, and their relationship with him was marked by a unique covenantal bond. This bond was not just a religious contract, but a defining feature of their communal and individual identities. And this is because we need to consider an important transformation regarding the name of Yahweh. which until now we have only touched upon but have not delved into. The fact that the name of Yahweh did not transition directly from polytheism to monotheism. Before that, it was revered within the context of henotheism.